Welcome back to Ampersand. Today's episode features Naomi Fierro Peña, the founder of That Art Party, and we talk about all things art for BIPOC adults. We talk about the power of art for healing and liberation, how art can feel like a luxury, and how we can carve out space to connect with the artist within all of us. She also talks about why she left the teaching profession, a Mother's Day event that she hosted for BIPOC immigrants and their adult children, and why she no longer fears failure. This was such an inspiring conversation and got me thinking about all the ways that I am an artist and my artistic practices. And quick PS before we dive into the episode, I've opened up a few coaching spots this fall 2023 to work with me as a life coach. I help women and BIPOC folks reconnect with their wholeness and their joy. This is something that has a special place in my heart, given how 2 years ago I was that burnt out high achiever working a six-figure job and feeling like I had everything that I needed, that I wanted to be and feel successful, be and feel fulfilled, yet I didn't feel it at my core. I was feeling empty. And the journey that I went on, the tools that I used, the wisdom that I uncovered, I would love to share with you. If you are in a similar boat, if you've taken a beat and you feel burnt out and you feel unfulfilled and feel like there must be a higher purpose for me. I'm not sure if this job, this relationship fits the person that I've become or intend to become. If any of those things resonate with you, DM me, message me on Instagram, and we'll talk. We'll set up a free 60-minute clarity call to see whether or not there's a good fit. As a reminder, the life that you want, the person you intend to embody is available, and it is waiting for you to arrive. And if you need support arriving, landing, walking that path, I'm available and I'm ready for you. So without further ado, let's dive into this beautiful episode. Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and welcome back to Ampersand. Ampersand is a podcast about integrating all parts of yourself and how beautiful life can be when you do so. Today I have a very special guest on, Naomi Fierro Peña. She is her pronouns are she, her, and ella. She is a soulful artist, engaging facilitator, and community curator. She specializes in creating artful wellness spaces for BIPOC adults. After 10 years of teaching, she opened her own business, That Art Party, art and play for BIPOC adults, as a means of healing and liberation for communities of color. Thank you so much for coming on today, Naomi.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. Of course. To get things started, I feel like there's a lot I would love to unpack here, but I actually noticed on your website you have a longer sentence around, and I'll quote, "We are art and we deserve safe spaces to relish in it." Can you help us unpack that a little bit, and what does it mean to you to not only create art, but to truly be and embody art?
Yeah, thanks. I was first envisioning through this business a really grounded and centered safe space for BIPOC adults. And the reason why I talk about us being the art is that in a society where we're often taught through the gaze of white supremacy, and we are constantly being surrounded by, and the ideas of white supremacy culture are consistently reinforced in the culture in the United States, it's easy to forget that communities of color, our ancestry, our lineage, we are the keepers of culture in so many ways. What becomes pop culture often I want to say almost all of the time, starts with communities of color. And so what I have found is that adults will often, and BIPOC adults will often say, "Oh, I'm not creative. Oh, I don't really know about art." And when I hear that, I'm like, wow, what a good job this white supremacist capitalist system has done in
Right.
helping us disremember, right? Unremember that we actually we are the art. And so I mean that in all of our traditions, how communities of color create rituals, how we create space for community. And oftentimes there's always a beautiful artistic and visual element to those rituals and practices. And so I say that to say that, we are enough. We are the art already. There's no outside seeking that we need to do in order to tap into our creative genius.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely got a number of tingles when you said that. And I think it's so true what you said about how so many BIPOC adults, we forget what it means to be creative. We forget what it's like to tap into that youthful, playful part of ourselves that's a part of all of us, going back to our parents, our ancestors, the rituals they created during their daily lives. And I remember for myself, when I came to terms with what art meant for me, I realized that it didn't have to look a specific way. But I'd become so fixated on what I thought was like the quote unquote right way to do art. And I thought the right way was sitting in front of a canvas, right? And like painting every single day, or like quote unquote forcing myself to create art. And I just realized that is just not what we're meant to do. To your point, we're meant to remember this creative part of ourselves. So for you, how do you help people get in touch with that? How do you enable and empower them to remember this part of themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah, because it is about remembering that this piece is already there. And so I often talk a lot about inner child work and being able to tap into our inner child and heal that inner child or all the past versions of you, right? For example, whether that's 6-year-old Naomi or teenage Naomi, who was a completely different person, or early 20s Naomi, right? Like those are all versions of my inner child that I can revisit and reflect upon through the practices of creativity, art, and play. And so, how I get folks to do that during my sessions, I always start with a deep grounding just in our breath and in our body before we get started. I mean, folks come in with such joyous and kinetic energy. They're excited to be there, and I love that. And I do think it's really important for us to be able to individually and as a collective ground in our breath and just take a moment to realize how our body is feeling and what the sensations are in the moment that we're there sitting in the chair preparing to play with art. And so I always ground. um, Following that, I have folks check in with one another, and I choose very specific check in questions that one elicit memory, right? Elicit memory from childhood or ways that folks used to play as a young person, or also elicit desires to continue to play and take pleasure in art and creativity. And so I have folks reflect on that in the very, very beginning, and they have the option to share, they have the option just to keep that to themselves. But what I find is that most folks will share and also get inspired by what the stranger across from them is sharing about their journey with play and creativity and their desires to play. And so through that, I think one, we see ourselves mirrored in other folks. When someone else says or shares something, they then are like, oh, that jogs a memory for me about how I am like this or I'm not like this. And then two, it just allows folks to really authentically lean into their own inner voice and say, oh, this is how I used to play. This is what I desire for today's session. And so just those very kind of light touches to start our session really allow folks to kind of get in the mindset of this is not just a typical, paint and sip. I think folks are very familiar with that, but it's an intentional, curated space where art is part of our self-care ritual. It's a wellness experience. So it's exciting.
That is so exciting. And I just truly love the intentionality behind what you are doing, the experience that you've crafted the container that you're holding, because I believe this is one of the reasons why it's so important for there to be safe spaces for, BIPOC folks, because when one person leads with vulnerability, shares their story, that moment where they're able to tap into, reconnect with that part of themselves that was able to play and is in touch with that part of play, then it creates like this domino effect, this virtuous cycle where it inspires others to shine brighter or show up as themselves. And yeah, definitely want to just thank you, first of all, for creating that space. And wanted to ask too, I just want to hear a little bit more of your story and some of your earliest memories of play.
Yeah, that is a funny story, actually. It wasn't,
Yeah.
yeah, I was like, it wasn't until I was, in like my mid 20s that my then partner, now wife, asked me, how did you play? Like, did you grow up playing? And I thought that was such a, like, at first it felt like a ludicrous question. I was like, what kind of question? Like, of course, duh. Like, I had sex, and I'm like, obvio, yes. And then I actually really thought about it and was like, huh, so much of my life as the firstborn, the eldest daughter in an immigrant household. My family immigrated to the United States from Mexico um, in like the early 80s. And when I was born, it was me and five, well, maybe around seven adults, you know? And
Wow.
I often remember sitting around the dining room table with all the adults who would sit around the table with their cup of coffee or their vino or whatever it was. And it was just like chit chat, It was comadreando, which is like this beautiful way that we talk about, in this particular case, women, but I think it can apply to any gender, but how women can coexist and create community just through conversation and sit around the table and talk with one another. And that was playful to me. That was the play for me as a young person in particular, because oh man, the way that my tias would cackle, like laugh so hard, like doubling over at the stories and the way that folks were recounting oftentimes traumatic experiences from their past, um, and put like a humorous spin on it in order to cope and to make life, you know, something that we could all exist in. It was just like, man, that was a beautiful space. And I was like 6, 7 years old sitting around that same table, right? Not really understanding what everybody was saying, but I was like, oh, this is funny. This is the part where you laugh, or like, you know. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm like, that really was my version of play. But even in that, right? Like the other way to look at that is that my play was very much like adult like. And sitting, because sitting at you, when I think of young people today, I don't think about a 6, 7-year old sitting still at a table for 4 or 5 hours, you know? Like I think of young
So true.
people playing with lots of like, I don't know, textures and colors and things that elicit your senses and that you don't have to be sitting properly, you know, and still inattentively listening, right, in order to play. And so when I get the question of like, how did you play as a young person, as a child? It's not like, oh, I played outside in the dirt or I, played sports. I was never any good at sports. And I say that with all the love in my heart.
Mhm.
Like I said, in a non-judgmental way of myself. I just know like sports team was not for me. And so I wasn't an athlete in that way. But later on, I learned that dance was my form of play. And one of my tias, one of my aunties, she started her career in dance. I want to say when she was like my age now, 30. And for her immigrant family, that was a revolution. People in the family were not excited that she was choosing this life
Mm.
of art, right? Of dance, of performance.
Mm.
Um, but she was excited. She felt a conviction to that. And I, a generation later, reaped the benefits of that really risky, brave, and courageous decision because then I grew up feeling like dance was normal. Dance was part of every day. And that is where ultimately I began to really play. I was like, what are the shapes in which my body can make, not for the gaze of someone else, but for myself? How does this particular motion feel in my body? How does it feel to dance barefoot, right? Like that was the tradition we danced in. And how does that feel? How does it feel to dance for myself in a room full of other dancers, And that is where play and creativity really got to expand for me. But yeah, I think like in typical ways, no, I didn't play often. And so I think the way that that informs my business today is that I'm like, all the experiences that I didn't get to have, like crafting or learning, you know, typical young people, I think arts and crafts type of play. Like I wanted to give that to myself as an adult, and to say it was okay to do that. Because I think at the time that I reached adulthood, then my mom would often be like, you're too old for that. Don't do that. What are you doing? Um, and that that brings me to that can take me down another road of how being parentified as a young person. But I'm also getting into this, so I will pause here for another for some input.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story. I really appreciate you sharing that it was like very honestly, to your point, with full acceptance, just atypical, that you didn't exactly play in the ways that I think of kids playing back then, and like sandboxes, running outside, getting dirty, playing in the mud, like you said. But I already kind of see this through line where from a very young age, you understood the power of community, of connection, of laughter, of storytelling. And it's beautiful thinking about how that has informed like who you are and the spaces you've created. And to also, I mean, so many things that we could touch on, because I also relate to a lot of like especially my immigrant parents, they don't necessarily accept the ways that I play. They think that that's something that's meant to be left behind, that I'm meant to be serious, that I can't play for play's
Mhm.
sake. Like,
Mhm.
I remember countless times during my time off where I'd be telling my mom that I'm just gonna go climbing. She's like, "Why? Is that gonna help you get a job?" And I was like, "No, it's not gonna help." I mean, not like tangibly, right? But it just gave me so much joy. And I feel like that's something so many of us have had to process and come to terms with, that we can and we're meant to carve out time to do something just for play's sake, just for the joy, just because it lights us up and makes us feel a certain way. It's not for anyone else's gaze, it's not for anyone else's pleasure. It's truly for us. And I feel like it's when we claim, right, those things are truly for us, that's when our lives start to
Yeah.
shift. And sometimes small, but then other times like significant ways. So I guess going off of that, I'm curious, were there particular like catalysts or moments where like that play or that like reflection on your engagement with play start to like snowball?
Mm. Yeah. Were there catalysts in this journey of play? Um, hmm. I mean, the one that comes to mind now, and I'm sure there are many more, but the one that's top of mind in this moment is the pandemic. You know, I think I had always been, prior to that, I had always been like a quote unquote divergent thinker in any professional workspace where I was like, it's after 5, don't contact me. I was like,
You're already on that
right.
boat.
I was like, absolutely not. Um, and I was already like, no, my lunch break is gonna bring my break. I'm a full human being that cannot sit in front of a desk or in front of, you know, a classroom full of people all day long without tending to my own needs. I remember being a teacher and in my first 2 years, not being able to use the bathroom on when my body
Mm,
said it needed to use the bathroom because I could not
oof.
leave my classroom unattended until I could flag down another staff person, another adult in the building to come and watch my kids so that I could go use the bathroom and come, you know? And I was like, wow,
Mm,
that was a major moment of like the way that I am earning a living, the way that I am paying for the basic needs, right, to my humanity is actually by rejecting my human needs. Right, like, and that was a very
wow.
like, that was a visceral reaction. I remember going to the doctor, and the doctor was like, "Yeah, actually, teachers have the highest rate of UTIs." And yeah, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," and it makes
Wow.
sense, right? Because we weren't allowed to like, we would then have to, like, measure how much water am I drinking? Am I gonna then, be able to use the bathroom at this, like, 10-minute interval, right? If you're not bombarded by young people. Anyway, but that was one moment where I was like, "Wow, I need to be able to exist in a space and make my living where I can honor my human needs." And so I left
Mm,
teaching and I was in a still a youth development role, but it wasn't as a direct teacher for some time. And that was when I got really clear on like, okay, these are the boundaries that I'm going to hold for myself. And I'm not going to take work home, right? Teaching, I was working all the time, but I was like, I'm not going to take work home. I'm going to take my breaks when I need to. And that was really important just to learn that like I could work, make money, feed myself, and start to honor my human needs, right? And so like that was I was like, okay, it is possible. Did I love the job? No, I mean any job working for somebody else I wasn't going to be 100% happy, but I was like, but it was a learning moment. And so then when I moved to my next phase back in a school system, um this was a space where I was given a lot of autonomy, a lot of creative
hmm
license, so to speak. And it was fun. And I was getting really, really like kind of enveloped in the creative process. And then I realized, wait, I'm still being creative on behalf of someone else for the betterment of this institution. and I will only make however much money they decide is the value of my creative energy. And
Yeah.
that's where I was like, whoa, actually, I don't want to consistently go to a white man, literally, and continue to ask and plead and try to prove that my value every year was X, Y, or Z. And so that I could get this raise and so that I could, live what I think now folks are terming a soft life, like I didn't have that terminology then, but I was like, yeah, I don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck. I'm creating beautiful things. I'm creating spaces for young people and adults to authentically live into themselves and to become leaders. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing work. And I don't want to plead with someone else to decide the value of that when I know full well what the value is. And so when the pandemic began, it was a time of, obviously a lot of pain, a lot of grief, a lot of letting go. But also, we saw so many, or the adults that could, right, return to very, and I want to say childlike, and I don't mean that in any negative connotation, but I mean very childlike, basic um, activities. Like we saw adults take up a quote unquote hobby more so than ever before. And these were oftentimes creative hobbies, right? Folks were picking up how to knit, how to sew, adult coloring books. They were taking, creative online classes. And so we heard so often that this was essential or integral to the mental health of so many adults during a time of so much isolation, pain, and grief. And I was like, yep, that's it. That is what I want to do. That is the thing I want to continue to create when we are, quote unquote, post pandemic, which, that's arguable. But, you know, I don't want to return to normal. I want us to continue to say, actually, I need to do something away from the screen. And I need it to be something that is using my hands or something where I'm not having to make 100 decisions at a rapid fire pace that are life and death for someone, like just taking space for yourself just to luxuriate. I think that art and play is a space that can feel luxurious. And I'm here to say that, like, every BIPOC adult can have that, you know? And so, like, I'm really committed to that vision. I know that I want BIPOC adults to see art and play as a ritual in their self-care just as much as the gym is a regular practice for their physical health, right? Art and play can be a regular practice for your social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And I want to create a space that nurtures that.
Oh, that is so good. That is such wow, that is incredible. First of all, I love that you said that art and play can feel luxurious. It can feel like that bubble bath, right? It can feel like a time for you to really sink into the present and really have something be restful and easeful. And this just like the story that you told around, I think one that for all of us, right? We would not be where we are without our parents, without our relatives, without our ancestors, without your aunt, right? Just being like, hey, I want to be a freaking dancer. I don't care what you think. I'm gonna do that, and that in some ways planted a seed in your being, right? That gave you that permission, or gave you that little nudge to say, like, you know what, I can do this too. I don't have to stay in a job that, as wonderful, right? I'm not saying anything negative about educators, but as wonderful as it is to be a teacher, I didn't know that. And now that I think about it, I didn't really see my teachers use the restroom very often. I didn't really think about it from their perspective that they felt like they couldn't, or they truly couldn't without there being another teacher there. And so for you to frankly, like, you've done the fucking hard work. I will say that. You've done the hard work. You know your self-worth, and you are here to like honor your boundaries and serve in a way that feels good for you. So truly, like, so much admiration for the inner work that you've done. I know some listeners might be wondering, how do I start doing that inner work? And I know we touched on, getting in touch with your inner child, really understanding and unpacking what are your boundaries. But for folks that are kind of feeling stuck, maybe asking themselves, well, like, Naomi, I don't have a hobby. I don't even know what play really feels like. What are some like simple ways or like practices or suggestions you might have for folks who are looking to incorporate more of that, but just don't really know where to start?
Totally. I mean, one, you've already taken the first kind of step, so to speak, by noticing the desire to begin, right? And I think that is huge. So already you're well on your way, I would say. And then two, I think a practice that was really essential for me was the practice of journaling. And maybe not everyone is a journaling right person, and that's okay, but I would push you to try it. I read The Artist's Way at the beginning of the year, and if you haven't read that, I recommend it. Where there's a practice of your morning pages, right? It's 3 free flow pages in a journal every morning. And that can feel like a lot sometimes. You're like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. And some days your pages are just a running list, and that's okay. But some days you really start to elicit memory, or you really start to ask yourself future plans or desires or pleasures in life, right? Creating a list of your top 10 desires, right? What are the things that you really want? If, money was not an obstacle, if time was not an obstacle, what would you want to do? What are the things on your bucket list? What are the things that, if no one was looking and you weren't afraid of any judgment, what would that be? I remember, it's funny, I have a list on my desk that was part of The Artist's Way, and they asked us to list 10 forbidden joys. And I was like,
Ooh,
right, I was
ooh.
like, I don't even know what is that 10 forbidden joys. And it's funny, I look at it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I've made almost all 10. Uh, I said, go on vacation, take more art classes, dye my hair purple. My hair is currently purple. And I was
Hell
like,
yes.
I want to wear coveralls and Crocs, and I do.
Yeah, hell yeah. I love
Right?
this
I was
stuff.
like, and these are just like, there's the point being, like, in reading these things out loud is like, they can't, in that moment in time, right? It felt forbidden, something that I couldn't even speak, right? But I wrote them down, and I didn't even like look at them every day. It was just, I randomly looked in like June, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really feel like I have at least 5 of these already done. And so it was a pleasant realization that just allowing myself the space to go there mentally and be like, okay, what are 10 things I really, really, really want to do? That opened a portal, I think, energetically for me to be able to manifest those things. And so I would say, try that. Also go on an artist date. And that's something else with the Artist Way talks about, in just spending an hour, 2 hours in your week just for you, just for you to attempt something creative or to get re-inspired. There's so much art in the world that can be public art, right? Walking down a muraled neighborhood, going to the museum. So many museums have free days. Um, you know, you can
Yeah.
take yourself to the art supply store. It's amazing how my brain goes in like 20 million directions just by being surrounded by so many different colorful art supplies and textures. And that alone begins to open up your creative portal. And so take yourself on a date, nurture the artist that you want to be. And you'll realize over time, you already have everything you need to be that. And so I would say that. You can also follow my Instagram page. I give lots of tips all the time at that art party on just like simple ways to doodle, or I host virtual play dates where folks can come together and play. And whether that's through doodling or zine making or what have you, it's an online community so that no matter where you are in the world, you can have access to creating, but also in community with others, because there's something else kind of like energetic. It's like a energetic catalyst in being able to be surrounded by other people as you are embarking on this journey. So I give you those.
Those are great suggestions, and definitely plus one, The Artist's Way. I remember it was one of the first books I read when I took time off. And to your point, I had those days where I didn't really know what I was writing, but I was just kind of I trusted the process. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna follow through. I'm gonna do this for at least a month. And to your point, I think like for me, after a few days, I started to get into a rhythm. That's when I think once I started to get some of those, I think like grocery list items out of the way, then I was able to really access the depths of my subconscious and tap into a part of myself I didn't realize existed, but like was there beyond the facade of the Jenny that was a high achiever, that sought external validation, that thought that frankly making money had to be difficult, had to be hard. So those are actually truly some inspiring questions for me as well, because I'm thinking about what are some things that for me feel forbidden. This is such an interesting way of framing things too, because I like how it encourages people to think about, like, I wouldn't call it negative, but it's like the opposite side. It's like a different lens and perspective of looking at things. So I wonder for me what that is, but I feel like in terms of that play for me, just doing this podcast is a form
Yeah.
of play. I didn't realize it would be, because I think for some people they're just like, well, it's like work. You know, you're just working, you're creating a podcast. But truly, like, I gave birth to this and I get to have inspiring conversations with people about a variety of topics. It is truly so inspiring. And I think I remember too, just like taking myself to like a Michael's or an art store. And I remember as an adult buying myself stickers the first time. Oh, actually, that was a forbidden thing. I was like, so I was an elementary school kid. I remember we like would get stickers for, okay, this definitely fed my ego because I got stickers for like, good grades. But we had these like sticker books that we created. And I was so excited about these like Lisa Frank
Oh,
iridescent. Do you remember
way to
Lisa
my
Frank?
heart. Yes.
But I remember just like collecting all these stickers, but then as an adult, I don't know, like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure like I threw away that sticker book, but then there's something so satisfying about being like, you know what? At the tender age of 28, I can go freaking buy myself stickers and create myself a sticker book.
Exactly. And like it just, even witnessing you remember that, like your whole energy changed, the whole tone of your
Mm.
voice, like the cadence, you were just lit up, in just
Yeah.
remembering. And so imagine how your energy changes when you're
Mm.
actually creating, when you're doing, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. And it must be so incredible for you to like just bear witness to that, truly. To see like these adults kind of blossom into their potential and know that you played a role in that. That is incredible.
Thank you. It's very like it's an honor, I think, to be able to see that because folks used to ask me, "Oh, would you ever create sessions for kids or for youth?" And I was really clear on the fact that no. At this point in my life, in my career, like I want something for adults to focus on themselves because what I often found, especially in the education industry, it's so easy. And I did it all the time too, to divert attention or reflection or all the introspective questions we ask of young people and their lives. Yet, are we asking ourselves that? Because everything was in service of young
Mm.
people. And oftentimes we would put ourselves last in order to do that. And I'm like, okay, but where is the space where we ask ourselves those questions, where we are actually put first,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Mm, that's so true. And that's a relationship that I'm kind of coming around to as well. Like, what does it mean to put myself first? What does it mean to put myself on like a healthy pedestal, if that makes sense? Because I'm used to putting other people on pedestals and like bending over backwards for their needs. So just be able to like shift that dynamic and put myself first is uncomfortable at times, but I know that I'm leading from a place of like authenticity, of rest, of knowing my self worth. And actually, going back to something you mentioned earlier around just like the creation of this business, feeling so inspired to do this after having spent, I believe, 10 years in the education space. Um, I'm curious how you thought about the money aspect. And I'll share a little bit of my story. I feel like something that's been coming up for me as an entrepreneur is frankly having to unpack and let go of certain stories my parents had taught me around the right means to make money, how to make money. I feel like for me the biggest lesson I've had to unlearn and I'm continuing to unlearn is that making money is
hmm,
painful, that involves backbreaking work, that involves, overextending yourself. And then also on the flip side, I've learned from my parents as well that once you have money, you're not necessarily in a better place because you can't spend that money. You have to save that money. You yeah, truly. It's been humbling to recognize the ways in which my money mindset has held me back because I'm burning the candle on both ends. So I'm curious for you, you know, like how have you been grappling with, and changing your own money mindset?
yeah, that's a big question. And that is an ongoing healing journey for sure. I think there's a couple of things that really created my money mindset. One, again, being raised in an immigrant household, it was always work first, work again, and then maybe play. But mostly work and then work and then work. Because if we don't work,
Right.
right, we're not surviving. You're not getting fed. There's no clothes on
Mm,
your back, right? Like it was, you have to work. Because again, my mom and all of her family, my dad too, but in a different way. My mom, when they came here, they worked as kids, you know? And so their childhood was working and they needed to do that, right? Like I don't hold any judgment. I'm just like, wow, there was never any real opportunity to play or to not work because it meant that their needs would go unmet. And so I was like, that's one. All of my life witnessing that and hearing those stories, right? Like that is a
right.
socializing and that's a deep development of like how to understand money, how to fear it, how to value it, what
Yeah.
it takes to get it, to your point of the pain, the sacrifice, that's another huge thing, right? Like the levels
Sacrifice.
of sacrifice that you have to make in order to have it. And then again, you were talking about saving. My mom then became an accountant. And so,
Mm.
yes, so everything was saving. Like there was no, let me close the door so that you don't hear my background. I was like,
Okay. Yeah.
okay, sorry about that. But yeah, it was all about saving. And, she would often tell this story about how she went without buying herself like new clothes or shoes or anything for herself for like, I want to say like 10 years. Because she was like, I needed to save so that you and your brother, I have a younger brother, so that you and your brother could have things, right? Right. Again, this idea of sacrificing. And to this day, she asked me if I'm saving money. And I'm like, interesting. Because then later on, I learned that actually how your money makes money is not by going into the savings account. Right. And I was like, wow, things that wealthy people know that we don't know. And so,
Right.
yeah, I mean, those are things that created my money mindset. But I think actually in meeting my wife, I began to kind of peel back the layers of what that meant. And, I remember when we first started dating, she'd be like, oh, do you want to go have dinner tonight? You want to go out? You want to da 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 da? And I was like, okay, this will last, a few months, whatever the honeymoon period is, right? And it continued. And I was like, girl, at what point are we going to save some money? Like, we can't be going out all the time. And she's like, what is the point of working as hard as we work if we're not going to enjoy the money that we make? She's like, I'm not being irresponsible with my money. There's always money to pay the bills. There's always money to, have our basic needs met. But what are we doing if we're not enjoying it? And I was like, well, damn, I don't know. It's just
Damn.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that. It was like life altering, right? And oh my gosh, I mean, it's still something that right now that we share finances, it's still a conversation that we come to regularly. But I think to your point of entrepreneurship and what it means to start a business, like, ooh, it takes so much capital. And so many people don't talk about that, right? Like we see all of these fast kind of sound bites and stories on social media of, folks that have done it on their own and have left their corporate 9 to 5 and then have become their own boss. And, that feels and can look really enticing. And you don't see that like when you're working for yourself, you're working around the clock because there's only you to do it. So you don't have necessarily
Yeah.
employees yet. I was like, whoa, right.
Nope.
And so, I recently took a vacation and I was reading, don't ask why I was on LinkedIn on vacation. Again, terrible. But I was on LinkedIn and yeah, I read a report though that talked about how freelancers and entrepreneurs are less likely to really take a vacation, or when they are on vacation to really be disconnected or unplugged, because again, when we stop working, that is directly related to the money you're bringing in, right? We don't get paid leave as a single person company. In addition, there's not another person there to make up the work when you are out on the beach or enjoying or what have you, right? So all of those things, are important things to consider. And I still took the vacation. Like I still went, and I was like, okay, how can I prepare
Right.
myself in the months prior to say, okay, if I don't work, I'm still going to have this amount set aside for myself so that when I return, I'm not hurting financially. And so I like that takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of financial forecasting. It takes a lot of hustle. And I mean hustle in the way of like being hungry and going out and getting the client, right? Or what, however it is that you are making your money in your business. Um, yeah. So, I mean, that's a little bit of everything about my money mindset, but it's growing.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. And I feel like to your point, it's like ever a process where we're just peeling back the layers of the onion and recognizing the stories we were brought up in and then continually like deconstructing and like challenging those stories and just validating for ourselves, like, is this actually true? Like, what if I don't save my money? What if I invest in myself? What if I invest it in something that brings me joy? Because I actually remember getting into, frankly, like, arguments with one of my partners around just like spending money on things that brought us joy. And at that time, even though I was making a lot of money, I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I had to put it away for some future rainy day, for like future impending doom and gloom or something. Like that was somehow, you know what I
Yes,
mean?
I
Like
do.
one day the one day like the earth is gonna I don't know, like there's certain things that are true, certainly with climate change, but I definitely felt like I grew up with a very like negative money mindset, and like you must set aside money otherwise in case of that rainy day where the car breaks down or like you break your bones or fall down the stairs. So I was like living with this perpetual fear of like, oh my god, I'm gonna fall, fall down the
Mm-hmm.
stairs or something. Knock on wood, I don't, but yeah, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to recognize that like we don't have to live the way that our parents did, that our ancestors did, and that we can make money in a way that feels joyful, and we can, frankly, to your point, like be smart about the ways that we plan for the future. Because if you do know you have a vacation coming up, right? You can think about, yeah, making sure you have money set aside, thinking about maybe not scheduling a call for the day you get back or like the evening in case of like, I don't know, delays in flights, etc. So that's definitely, I really appreciate you sharing that perspective and how you've been thinking about it. Um yeah. Something else that also comes up for me is I'm curious if right now you've been targeting like um yeah, I'm curious if there for you have been any differences in like um BIPOC children of immigrants versus like immigrant adults themselves, and if this is like,
Yeah.
is this an audience that you're catering to
Yeah,
today,
that's
or how you think
yeah,
about that?
that's a great question. And I think my eyes got so big because um
I think about my mom like she doesn't know how
right,
to play.
right. And so I back in May hosted a Mother's Day play date. And I was actually very, very apprehensive about it. And I was like, ugh, I don't think I'm gonna do it. And like the idea came to me randomly, and I was like, this is a great idea. And then immediately I was like, maybe it's not a great idea because then what if my own mom wants to come and then what if she hates it? I was,
Mm.
I was like, this is, I don't know. So it took me a long time just to commit and say, okay, yes, this is the theme of the event that I'm going to host. When I tell you that to this day, it is my favorite play date I have hosted,
Oh.
I'm not exaggerating. We had, I want to say like 18 people, and most of them were children of immigrants our age who brought their mothers, who were, right, the immigrants
Mm.
themselves. And oh man, like one, English was not the dominant language. We heard everything from Portuguese to Spanish to Chinese. Like that was the language and the sound in the room. And it was really beautiful just to hear that. And then I also remember the opening kind of check-in question, one of them was, just what brought you here? Or just what's your intention? And I asked that of both the parent and the adult child. And so many of the parents, including my mom, was like, I don't know what it's like to play. I don't even know, like when my daughter invited me here, I had no idea what it was, but I just wanted to do it because I want to spend time with my daughter. And, again, when I talk about how many adults actually had the opportunity to play as children, many of them did not. And for all of the like adult children in the room, they often said, I'm here because I want my mom to experience what this is. I want her to experience what it's like to play, and just to play for the sake of it. I didn't know how to explain this to her, but I just knew that I had to bring her. And there were so many moments, and it was sweet because there were so many moments where like you would see that the daughter or son, like we had with other folks, and they would check in with their mom and be like, okay, does this make sense? Are you getting it? Is it going,
Oh, that's so sweet.
And like, the play date itself was around Legos and creating a Lego set of flowers, right? To give to your mom on Mother's Day. And it was really sweet watching all these adults play with Legos together. And the other thing that I think about in terms of the actual medium that we chose for that play session, Legos, at least when I was growing up, was very gendered. It was sold and marketed as a very masculine, male-centered activity, right? The idea that like boys would be builders and that girls were supposed to play with Barbies, And so it was really also beautiful to see so many women building, right? Building worlds and building fantasy and building beautiful constructions just for the sake of it and for themselves. And yeah, I mean, there were definitely, I think like the level of understanding that happened was different for everyone, as is with any event that I host. Some people were really inspired and really like, wow, I needed this. I didn't know how much I needed this. Thank you. Some people were like, cool, I spent the morning with my daughter. And, some people were like, I'm glad I came. And that was that, So there were all different levels, I think. But the point is that they did it and they tried it. And that was the most important thing, I think. My mom came in and she was like, I don't think I'm a creative person. And she was like, but I'm here because not only to support my daughter, yes, obviously I want to support her, but I want to try it. I want to be creative in this way. And that was a big deal because never heard my mom say anything like that. Her, like, what, I don't know, there's a term for like your ability to take risks or your risk tolerance. Is that what it is? Right.
Yep.
It's pretty low. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
So even this was like a big risk for her. And so in seeing that, I was like, I hope that it felt like a safe risk to take.
Wow. I'm so glad you put on that event, even though you noticed that there was some fear, some questions around hosting it. But I don't know if you feel this way, but as an entrepreneur, sometimes, and I feel like when it comes to just taking risks that are truly aligned with our highest selves, there can be some degree of fear with those things are really going to push us and allow us to grow and expand in a beautiful way. So first of all, I commend you for moving forward with the event. And I just love how beautiful it was. Like, to your point, you can't ever predict how anyone's going to respond, what people's intentions are. But for people to truly walk away being like, wow, thank you for putting this on. I didn't realize that this is something I could do because I never used to play when I was younger. I think that's just, it's so lovely to be able to have those spaces and experiences and to know that you tried.
Yeah.
Because I think I used to be the kind of person who like didn't even want to try if I didn't think it could be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm realizing it's so worth it to try because then from there I can use that as a data point or I can validate something or, something else. But yeah. What was it ultimately like having your mom there, see you as the woman that you are, see that you've grown and transformed and gone through all these phases and evolutions, and you're in the specific season and essence of like
Yeah.
you?
I don't know if she saw that, like I don't I
That's
don't
fair.
know. And I think that's always been the tension
Mm,
between my mother and I, is
yeah.
that like I think she has a very specific vision of who I am or who she wants me to be. And I have a completely different,
Mm,
like when I say completely different, like ultimately in the opposite direction different, idea of who I am and who I want to be. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember what it was like on that day. I was really nervous. I was really nervous. I was like, wow, how much criticism am I going to hear today about this could have been better? And you could have done this, and next time I would do this, and da 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 da. And I was like, okay, what? That's great.
yeah, been there.
So I think I was really nervous and apprehensive. Um, Ultimately, I think she enjoyed it. I remember her saying to me, I don't even know how to describe what you do. Like, I really have no idea what you do. And I was like, well,
Right.
hopefully today you saw a little bit of what I do. And I gave her some language to use if people ask. But I think,
Mm,
yeah, to your point about how you never know the way someone will respond or how someone will react or digest to the experience. I don't really know with my mom. I don't know that she's the type of person to also like verbally share with me what it was like. And so, you know I did it. She was there. I hope she enjoyed it.
mm-hmm.
And it was also a lesson in like overcoming a very personal fear.
Mm,
I take
mm,
risks all the time. My wife also loves to joke with me that I just um live life dangerously. I just am reckless
love it.
with decisions. um I just, I have this really deep faith and trust that things are going to work out the way that they're supposed to. And so in that sense, I easily take a bunch of risks, but I think this felt particularly personal. Um and I faced that fear. And so I'm glad that I did that because, like I said, it was one of my favorite events. So I'm glad I did.
mm. Well, I'm so glad you did too. And I so hear you around the fear associated with like revealing our truth to the people that know us or have known us from a young age or like know us as a specific
Mm.
version of us. Like I've noticed that for myself as well, that like last year when I finally found the courage to tell my family that I needed, help, that I wanted to go to therapy, that in some ways felt scarier than going public about like my breakup and the things that I went through because I know at the end of the day we're not meant to be all things to all people. There will be judgment, but for some reason the judgment from my family felt like it would sting so much more. Like that thorn would cut so much deeper. So I really feel you when it comes to that. And I think there's something so valuable to your point about equipping parents, and especially immigrant parents, with the language that they can use, because I've noticed something my mom often tells me, as frankly as I'm trying to figure myself out as well, is like, she's like, I don't know what you're doing. She's like, are you a therapist? And I was like, well, I guess maybe like
Uh-huh.
adjacent to therapy. Like I do podcasts, I do like psychedelic coaching, like I guess I do something in the realm of therapy, but for her, it's almost like if I can't explain what you're doing, then it's not that I'm a failure, but then she feels like in some way she's not fulfilled her purpose here. Because I've noticed it seems like for my mom specifically, like me and my sisters are her greatest
Mm-hmm.
legacy. And so this is something I'm navigating. I'm curious like what your take on this is, but how do you think about navigating that, like, I'm going to call it healthy tension between, to your point, the expectations that your parents have for you versus like the expectations and dreams that you have for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna say it like I shattered that a long time ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think similar to you, I grew up thinking that I needed to be perfect, right? I needed to do all of the things, be the student body president, do XYZ extracurriculars, do all these things, um, because I had the weight of an entire generation that immigrated here. And I had to do all the things because they sacrificed so that I could live the American dream, right? And they're like, well, you need to do
Yeah.
everything because we couldn't. And so I
Yeah.
lived a lot of my adolescence in that what I thought was reverence, right? I was like, I
Mm.
have to do all these things to honor their sacrifice. Um, and I did, and I got a lot of "I'm proud of you, mija," or Naomi's doing X, Y, and Z. Naomi went to Georgetown, now she's doing this. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and that was all very nice. And ultimately, I wasn't happy. I was tired. I was an 18-year-old that was tired. And I was like,
Mm.
how am I? Right? I was like,
Right.
why am I 18 and I'm already like exhausted from life?
Mm.
Um, and I, in my early 20s, was outed. Um, and my family reacted really negatively. I think like in the worst ways that you think about. Like I was kicked out. I was estranged from my family. They didn't talk to me for years. Like it was just, I think it was a regrettable time. I don't know that any of them will ever admit that, but I think that was my first experience with like, well, what happened to all of the other merits that I had and all the other things that I've achieved?
Right.
None of that is different because I'm deciding to love a woman. All of a sudden,
Mm.
nobody was proud of me. All of a sudden, all those same people that were like, Mija, can you watch the kids? Were like, I don't know if you can be around my children. And it was like a complete 180. And I was like, wow. So how quickly you can fall from grace, right? And
Mm.
I decided, I was like, it's not worth it. I don't need to live my life for anyone else. I need to live it for me. And so, I think the concept of chosen family became really important. I was always a person who was really like sensitive to energies and like I would say like selective with who I wanted to be around because I was so sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't think I necessarily had a lot of friends. I was always very content with like, I have a few friends, but they're really good friends, you can count on them for
Mm-hmm.
anything. And so that only became like intensified when I didn't feel like I had blood family anymore. And so then I was like, okay, who are the people I'm choosing to have in my life that see me for who I choose to be, not for this version of myself that they want me to be.
Yes.
And so I grappled with that for like all of my 20s. And, I think I have a really different relationship with my family. I have really good boundaries now, really good boundaries about what I will do, what I won't do, what I'm willing to tolerate, what I'm not going to tolerate in my own home. Like just, I'm creating a
Right.
reality that feels healthy for me in all the ways that I'm showing up today. And so, I do think it's a tension still, right? Like my family and I
Mm-hmm.
now see each other. Not everyone, but I'm really clear about that uncle that is homophobic. Don't talk about him in my house. I understand he's your brother, but he's really clear about the reasons why he doesn't accept me. So don't talk about him in my house, And it's difficult for
Mm-hmm.
the generation before me to understand that I am asking them to respect this boundary and why I have not yet forgiven him for all of these things that he doesn't do,
Right.
um, or that he says about me. But I'm like, I don't need to. And so the tension is always, am I going to say something right now? Am I not going to say something right now? But ultimately, I have to choose me. I have to, because no one else is going to do that. So, I ultimately remember that in the tensions. I think the way that I choose me can look different with different people. And that's something I'm learning. I'm like, okay, I don't always have to say it this way. Or, I'm like, okay, cool. Or maybe I don't have to say it in this moment, but I'm going to bring this up at this point later, in a space that she can really hear me. Yeah, so those are things I'm learning. But yeah, again, I just remember I'm like, they disappeared at the drop of a dime. So I'm
They
like,
really
I have to
did.
choose me and make my family. Yeah.
Yeah. That's powerful. And also both like incredibly challenging to have navigated at such a young age. And for some people, early 20s is not that young, but like it is in the grand scheme of things for you to have been outed in your family, even though they had so much respect for you, to disappear, to suddenly feel as though all the other merits that you had, had been wiped, like that slate had been wiped clean in some way. But I think it's such a good reminder for folks such as myself and others that are continuing to like navigate, right? This tension is just in some ways, right? Knowing that it will be there to a certain degree, like you may be able to heal it over time, but at the end of the day, to remember to choose you and to have faith in yourself. And I think that's actually one of the ways I'd like to wrap up the conversation. You talk about this like unwavering faith that you have in yourself and your willingness to take risks in a way that like sometimes your partner thinks is like, a little out there. What? I don't know. Okay, let me see if I can phrase this correctly. What are some of those things that give you
Hmm.
faith? And how do you continue to cultivate that, especially in moments where you may waver?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just know that choosing the opposite feels so much worse. Like it feels so much
Mm.
worse than any failure, or any, like I have to choose faith because not choosing it feels like shit. Like it just, and whatever moment I'm experiencing now can feel shitty, but I just know it's 100 times worse if I don't choose me. And somehow, every time I choose me and every time I listen to the little voice, the intuition, the knowing, I'm like, yeah, universe did a thing. They've made sure to provide for me. Like I know that I made the right choice. And in the moments that I don't choose me, that I don't listen to my intuition, I regret it every time. Like it's so clear. I'm like, oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have continued in this particular, relationship or contract or offer. I felt it on the first time we spoke, and why I'm still doing it now, I don't know. Now that I did it, I feel terrible because I knew, you know? And so, yeah, I think some things feel really risky for someone else. And that's why those people are not running this business. I am. I'm like that I think that makes me
True.
uniquely positioned to be an entrepreneur, to own my own business, is that I am not afraid of those things. I'm not afraid of failing because, to my story earlier, I've already failed so hard. I've already lost
Yeah.
my home, my money, my family, and I got back up. And so whatever comes next, I know I can get back up. So that grounds me.
That's incredibly powerful to just know that no matter what happens, you can always pull yourself back up, that you can get back up, that you can keep going. And actually, one other question I wanted to ask is, how does your intuition speak to you? Because I know it speaks to everyone in a slightly different way. It may not necessarily be speaking.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I don't one, I always point to like my core, right? And it's not always necessarily a feeling in my stomach, right? Or in my gut. That's not always necessarily true. It's just I'm like listening to how I feel when I meet someone, or over the course of our conversation, or as I'm trying something new, or trying something I've done several times, right? Like I'm always really aware and in tune with just like, how do I feel? How do I feel right now? Do I feel good about myself? Is this a challenge that feels healthy and like I'm moving forward? Or is it one that feels demeaning, or one that I'm speaking and then not being heard? Or am I only listening? And is the other person not, inviting me into the conversation? Like I'm very aware of all of those kind of indicators. Um, like I'm really observant, I think, in that way. And so I think where other people will shake that off and be like, oh, I was just overthinking, or, you know, that was just this one time, or I think that person, like I listened the first time and I think it's okay. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm like, cool. Okay. That's okay. I'm not going to miss out. This opportunity wasn't for me. That's okay. As much as I thought I really wanted it, no, something else is waiting for me. So, yeah.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on my show. I really appreciate you taking the
Thank you so
time.
much for having me. I had a lot of fun and I'm really excited to continue supporting you. So, thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. And where can guests learn more information about you and get in
Absolutely.
touch?
You can always visit my website, www.thatartparty.com. Also on Instagram, I'm super active with tips and upcoming events. So at That Art Party, there's a period in between all the words. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect, and good luck with your creative energy.
Amazing. Okay.